Jessica Carter had a way of carrying a full tray without spilling a single drop, even on the busiest Saturday nights at Rosy's Diner in Cincinnati, Ohio. She weaved between tables with a kind of quiet grace that nobody really stopped to admire, because most people at Rosy's were too busy arguing about football scores or complaining about the price of eggs. Jessica did not mind. She had been invisible her whole life and had learned to find a kind of freedom in it. She was 26. Years old, with dark brown hair, she kept twisted into a low bun during her shifts, warm hazel eyes that softened even the rudest customers, and hands that were always slightly red from the dishwater she helped with at the end of each night. She wore no jewelry except a thin silver bracelet her mother had given her on her 18th birthday, the kind of bracelet that looked cheap but felt priceless. Her mother, Dorothy Carter, lived in a small 2-bedroom house on Maple Lane, a street where every house needed a coat of paint and every yard had at least one broken lawn chair. Dorothy had worked as a school cafeteria cook for 30 years until her knees gave out. And now she spent her days watching daytime television and reading romance novels from the library. She had a soft laugh and a sharp mind, and Jessica loved her more than anything in the world. Jessica had put her dreams of studying business administration on hold 3 years ago when Dorothy was diagnosed with a degenerative joint condition that made climbing stairs impossible. The medical bills were not catastrophic, but they were relentless, arriving every month like unwanted guests who never brought anything good with them. Jessica picked up double shifts at Rosy's and smiled through the tired feet and the patronizing customers, and the manager who called her sweetheart in a way that felt like an insult. She was wiping down the counter on a Thursday evening in early November when a man in a dark coat walked through the door and sat in her section. He was not the kind of man who belonged in a diner like Rosy's. His shoes alone probably cost more than a month of her rent. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair combed back cleanly and the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of being listened to. He ordered black coffee and a piece of apple pie and watched her with an attention that made her slightly uneasy. When she brought the check, he slid a business card across the counter along with a folded piece of paper. She looked at the card. It read, Gerald Hawthorne, Chairman Hawthorne Industries. She had heard the name before. Everyone had. Hawthorne Industries was one of the largest real estate and technology conglomerates in America. Their buildings were in every major city. Their name was on stadiums and airports. She looked at the folded paper without opening it. What is this? She asked him plainly. He told her to read it. She unfolded it and found a number written in clear black ink. It had 6 zeros after it. She looked up at him, and he met her gaze without blinking. He explained it calmly, almost clinically, the way a person explains the terms of a business contract. His son, Elliot Hawthorne, was 34 years old and had not left his Manhattan penthouse in 8 months. He had not attended a single board meeting in person, had not seen a doctor, had not spoken to anyone outside of phone calls and emails. After the death of his younger brother 2 years ago, Elliot had sealed himself inside his apartment and inside himself. Gerald had tried everything. Therapists, friends, business partners, travel. Nothing worked. Now he was trying something different. He wanted someone real. Someone who had no interest in Hawthorne money. Someone who came from a world Elliot had never known and could not easily dismiss. Gerald wanted Jessica to stay with his son for 9 nights in his Manhattan penthouse. She would have her own room. She would be treated with respect. She would simply be there, present, real, a human being in a space that had gone cold and empty. At the end of the 9 nights, the money would be transferred to her account with no conditions. No questions, no further obligation. Jessica stared at him for a long time. She thought about Dorothy's medical bills. She thought about the heating in their house that broke every winter. She thought about the business degree she had never finished. Then she thought about her own pride, and she weighed it carefully against everything else. She told him she needed to think about it. He left her his number and walked out into the November cold. That night she sat at the kitchen table with Dorothy, who was watching a talk show with the volume too high. Jessica did not tell her the truth about the offer. She said a wealthy family in New York had offered her a housekeeping position for 2 weeks. A temporary job with excellent pay. Dorothy turned down the television and looked at her daughter for a long moment with those sharp eyes that had never been fooled by anything. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," Jessica said honestly. "But I think I need to do it." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Then go with your whole heart, or don't go at all." 3 days later, Jessica was on a flight to New York City for the first time in her life. She had one carry-on bag, her silver bracelet, and a feeling in her chest that sat somewhere between terror and something she could not yet name. The Hawthorne penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. A man named Charles Wren met her in the lobby. He was in his 40s, quiet and efficient, with kind eyes that he kept professionally neutral. He brought her up in a private elevator and showed her to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment back home. There was a bathroom with heated floors and a view of Central Park that made her breath catch. Then he brought her down the hallway to meet Elliot. The living room was enormous and almost entirely dark despite the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittered outside like something alive, but inside the room felt suspended, airless, like a place that had forgotten it was inhabited. Elliot Hawthorne stood at the window with his back to her. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that was slightly too long, as if he had stopped bothering with appointments. When he turned around, Jessica saw a face that might have been handsome under different circumstances. Under light and sleep and something other than the flat, exhausted hostility that lived there now, he looked at her the way someone looks at furniture that's been rearranged without their permission. "My father sent you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said simply. "You should know that I didn't agree to this, and I won't pretend otherwise." "That's fine," she said. "I'm not here to be pretended at." Something shifted almost invisibly in his expression. Not warmth, not even interest exactly, but something like the first tiny crack in a wall that has stood for too long. "There are rules," he said. She waited. "You don't touch my things. You don't ask me personal questions. You don't try to fix me." His voice was flat and hard. "I am not a project." Jessica looked at him calmly. "Good," she said, "because I already have a job." She walked back to her room, sat on the edge of the enormous bed, looked out at the lit-up skyline of New York City, told herself steadily that she could do this. 9 nights. She had survived harder things than silence and a bitter, broken man in a penthouse above the world. What she did not tell herself, because she did not yet know it, was that silence between two people who are paying attention to each other is never really empty. It is always filling with something. And in that apartment above the city, something had already quietly begun. The second morning in the penthouse, Jessica woke before sunrise. Old habits from years of early diner shifts were impossible to shake, even in a bed that cost more than her car. She padded quietly into the kitchen in her socks and found it fully stocked but completely unused. The refrigerator held bottles of sparkling water, expensive cheeses still in their packaging, and a drawer of fresh fruit that looked like it had been ordered by someone who had no intention of eating any of it. She made herself scrambled eggs and toast, moving carefully in the unfamiliar space, and when the coffee finished brewing, she poured 2 cups out of habit. She left the second one on the kitchen counter and went to sit at the small table near the window to watch the city wake up below her. 20 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Elliot appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing dark sweatpants and a gray shirt that was wrinkled in a way that suggested he had slept in it, or perhaps had not slept at all. His hair was uncombed and his jaw was shadowed with several days of growth. He stopped when he saw the second cup of coffee sitting on the counter. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at her across the open kitchen. She did not explain it. She just turned back to the window. After a pause, she heard him pick up the cup. He did not say thank you, but he did not put it back down either. He stood at the opposite end of the kitchen and drank it in silence, while she watched the early taxis move far below like small yellow fish in a slow river. That was how the third morning went, too. And the fourth, neither of them talked about it. It simply became a quiet fact of the apartment. like the hum of the heating system or the particular way the afternoon light moved across the white walls. Jessica made 2 cups of coffee every morning, and Elliot picked one up, and they occupied the same space without demanding anything from each other. And something in that small, unremarkable routine began to loosen the air between them. By the 5th day, Jessica had settled into a gentle rhythm. She explored the penthouse in the mornings, reading books she pulled from the shelves that lined one entire wall of the study. The collection was extraordinary. Architecture, history, philosophy, several shelves of American literature, biographies of engineers and scientists, and one worn paperback copy of a John Steinbeck novel tucked sideways on the top shelf as though someone had hidden it there and never retrieved it. She pulled it down and brought it to the living room and curled into the corner of the large sofa near the window. She was 3 chapters in when Elliot walked through and stopped. "That book?" said she. Looked up. "Sorry, should I not have taken it?" He was looking at the cover with an expression she could not fully read. "My brother gave me that copy. He wrote something in the front." She opened the cover carefully. In the bottom left corner, in loose handwriting, were the words, "For when you forget what matters." Below that, a name. Tommy. She closed it gently and held it out to him. He did not take it. "Keep reading," he said quietly. Tommy would have liked that someone was. He walked out of the room, and Jessica sat very still for a moment with the book in her hands, feeling the particular weight of grief that belongs to other people, the kind you are trusted with unexpectedly and must hold carefully. That evening was the first time they sat in the same room by choice. Elliot came to the living room after dinner, which Jessica had cooked again, 'cause cooking steadied her nerves, and the kitchen was the one place in the apartment where she felt completely at ease. She had made roasted chicken and simple mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Dorothy used to make on Sundays when money was tight but love was not. She left a plate outside his study door without knocking, and when she came back to the kitchen an hour later, the plate was empty and sitting on the counter, washed and neatly set beside the sink. He found her in the living room reading near the lamp. He sat in the armchair across from her, opened his laptop and worked in silence. But it was a different silence now. Not the hard, defensive silence of the first night. This one was almost comfortable, the kind that 2 people build slowly without realizing they are building anything at all. On the 6th night, a storm moved over the city. The wind threw rain against the windows in long diagonal sheets, and the lights of Manhattan smeared and blurred until the whole city looked like a painting left out in the weather. Jessica stood at the window watching it, and did not hear Elliot come to stand a few feet behind her until he spoke. "When I was a kid," he said, "Tommy used to wake me up during thunderstorms. He was 6 years younger than me, and he was afraid of thunder. He would climb into my room, and we would sit by the window, and I would tell him that the sound was just the clouds arguing with each other and that they always made up by morning. He believed me every time." Jessica did not turn around. She kept looking at the rain. "How old was he?" she asked softly. 20-8, Elliot said. He was 28, and he was driving home from a birthday dinner, and a truck ran a red light. The rain hit the glass and ran down in long, crooked lines. "I used to think," Elliot continued, "that if I worked hard enough and built enough and controlled enough variables, then the world would stop taking things from me." He was quiet for a moment. "Turns out that is not how the world works." "No," Jessica said gently. "It is not." She heard him exhale behind her, a long, slow breath, like something being released that had been held for a very long time. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Do what?" "You work double shifts and take care of your mother and live in a house where the heating breaks and you still walk around like the world is basically decent. How do you do that?" She thought about it honestly before answering. "I think because I never expected the world to be fair," she said. "My mother taught me that early. She said life gives you what it gives you, and you can spend your energy being angry about the things you didn't get, or you can spend it being grateful for the things you have." She paused. "Most days I choose grateful. Some days I'm too tired for grateful, and I just choose to keep going. That counts too, I think." Elliot was quiet for a long time. When she finally turned around, he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the cold distance of the first night, not the careful blankness he had worn like armor all week. This was something stripped of armor entirely. Something raw and tired and honest. She did not look away, and neither did he. The 7th night was a Friday. Charles Wren had arranged a dinner delivery from a restaurant so well known in the city that even Jessica had heard its name mentioned on a television show once. The food arrived in sleek black containers, and Elliot set the table himself, something she suspected he had not done in a very long time based on the careful, slightly uncertain way he went about it. He put the wrong fork on the wrong side, and she quietly moved it without comment, and he almost smiled. They ate together at the dining table for the first time. He opened a bottle of wine and poured her a glass, and asked about Dorothy. She told him about the broken heating and the library romance novels and the way her mother could make a person feel. Completely seen in about 30 seconds of conversation. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely interested. Leaning slightly forward, not filling the pauses. Then he talked about his own mother, who had died when he was 19, and how his father had replaced grief with ambition and expected Elliot to do the same. How he had learned to speak the language of business before he ever learned the language of feeling. How Tommy had been the only person in his life who ever saw past the Hawthorne name and simply saw him. Elliot, the person underneath all of it, and now Tommy is gone, he said quietly. And I don't remember who that person was. He is still there, Jessica said. I have seen him a few times this week. Elliot looked at her. Carefully, he picks up a book his brother loved, and he washes a plate. Someone left outside his door, and he stands at a window in a storm and tells the truth to a stranger. That person is still there. Something moved across his face, and he looked down at his wine glass. When he looked back up, his eyes were different, warmer, and somehow more frightened because of it. The way people look when they realize they are feeling something they have no armor left to protect themselves from. After dinner, they sat on the large sofa together, rather than at opposite ends of the room. The city hummed distantly below, and the wine made the lamplight feel softer, and the conversation wound through the hours without either of them noticing the time passing. At some point, Jessica laughed at something he said, a real laugh, unguarded and bright. And Elliot watched her laugh with an expression she did not catch because she was already looking away, but the warmth of it stayed in the room long. After the sound faded, and then Patricia Sloane arrived, she came on the 8th morning without calling ahead, which Jessica would later learn was entirely in character for her. Patricia was 32, polished to a sharp and perfect edge, wearing a cream coat that probably cost what Jessica made in 3 months, with dark hair cut in a severe, beautiful line and eyes that swept the room and cataloged everything in it. Within seconds of entering, Charles let her in before Elliot knew she was there. Because Patricia had a talent for moving through the world before anyone could think to stop her. She found Jessica in the kitchen, pouring the morning coffee. The two women looked at each other. So you are the little project my father-in-law imported, Patricia said pleasantly. Her voice was smooth and unhurried. Jessica, is it? Jessica Carter. Yes, Jessica said, keeping her voice equally steady. Patricia smiled the kind of smile that has no warmth anywhere in it. How quaint. Do you know how many women Gerald has tried before you? 3 therapists, a life coach, 2 old college friends. She tilted her head slightly. None of them lasted 9 nights either. I am on night 8, Jessica said calmly. Patricia stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something quieter and more deliberate. I am going to tell you something kind because you seem like a decent person. Whatever you think is happening between you and Elliot is not real. It is loneliness, dressed up as connection. He is a Hawthorne. His world and your world do not touch. When those 9 nights are over, you will go back to your diner in Ohio, and he will eventually come back to his real life. She paused. That is not cruelty. That is simply how things are. Jessica looked at her steadily. Thank you for the advice, she said. The coffee is fresh if you want some. Patricia's composure flickered almost invisibly. Then Elliot's voice came from the hallway. "Patricia," the single word was cold, in a way. That was entirely different from the coldness of his first night with Jessica. This was not the cold of grief. This was the cold of clear and final refusal. Patricia turned with a perfect smile. "Elliot, darling, I came to check on you." He stood in the doorway, and his eyes moved briefly to Jessica. Just briefly. But long enough that Patricia caught it and understood something that made her expression harden beneath the smile. "You need to leave," Elliot said. "And you should call before coming next time." Patricia left. But the damage she had intended was done, or so she believed. That evening, Jessica sat on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest and stared at the window, and thought about Patricia's words with honest, careful attention. She was not naive. She knew the distance between her world and Elliot's was real and wide. She knew that the feelings quietly gathering inside her chest over the past 8 nights were dangerous, because they had nowhere safe to land. She thought about Dorothy and the silver bracelet and the scrambled eggs and the Warren Steinbeck novel and the storm against the windows and the way Elliot had looked at her. Across the dinner table on the 7th night, she thought, "It does not matter what is real and what isn't. What matters is what it does to you," and what those 8 nights had done too. Her was a reminder that she was a full and feeling human being with a heart worth giving. Not eventually, not someday, but now. Exactly as she was, waitress and Ohio girl and daughter and dreamer and all, there was a knock. At her door, she opened it, and Elliot was standing there with his hands in his pockets and an expression that looked like a man who has spent a long time preparing a speech and then arrived at the door and forgotten every single word of it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want tomorrow to be the last night." Jessica looked at him for a long, quiet moment and felt the truth of her own heart move through her like something warm and unstoppable. "Neither do I." She said the 9th night came the way all final things come, quietly and without ceremony. Wearing the ordinary face of just another evening while carrying the full weight of an ending underneath, Jessica made dinner again, pasta this time, with a simple tomato sauce and fresh bread she had found in the pantry. And they ate together at the dining table, with the city spread out beyond the windows. Like a living map of everything that existed outside their small, temporary world, they talked less than usual that night. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because there was too much. Neither of them had found the right door into it yet. Elliot refilled her water glass without being asked. Jessica passed him the bread without him reaching for it. These small, automatic gestures of two people who had quietly learned each other sat between them like evidence of something neither was ready to name out loud. After dinner, they washed the dishes together, standing side by side at the kitchen sink, the way Jessica and Dorothy did on Sunday evenings back home. Elliot was not practiced at it, and he used too much soap, and the bubbles got out of hand, and Jessica laughed, and he looked at the foam covering his hands and then looked at her, laughing in something. In his face opened completely wide and unguarded, the way a window opens after a long winter and lets the whole season change. They moved to the living room and sat together on the sofa, and Elliot put on quiet music from somewhere, and the lamp threw soft gold light across the room and outside the city. Did what the city always does, which is continue, indifferent and brilliant, while the people inside it feel things that seem too large for the buildings they live in. He reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, not with any grand speech attached. He simply placed his hand over hers on the cushion between them and held it. And she turned her hand over and held his back. And they sat like that for a long time without speaking, while the music played and the city glittered, and the 9th night moved slowly toward morning, just before midnight. He turned and looked at her with the full, honest weight of everything the past 9 nights had built. Between them, "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I have spent 2 years making myself into someone who doesn't feel things, and you walked into my apartment with one carry-on bag and undid all of it in 9 days. And I don't entirely know what to do with that." Jessica looked at him. "You don't have to know what to do with it tonight," she said. "But you're leaving tomorrow." "Yes." He tightened his hand around hers. "I don't want you to disappear. I don't want to be the kind of man who lets something real walk out the door because he is afraid of it." She looked at him carefully. "Then don't be that man." He kissed her then, gently and without urgency, the kind of kiss that is more about recognition than desire. The kind that says, "I see you, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." She kissed him back with everything she had been quietly feeling for 9 days. Every morning coffee, and every shared silence, and every moment of watching a closed-off man slowly remember how to be a person. When morning came, she packed her carry-on bag with the same careful deliberateness she had used when she first packed it back in Ohio. She folded everything neatly. She tucked the silver bracelet back onto her wrist. She took one long look at the view of Central Park from the guest room window and pressed the image into her memory like a flower between pages. Elliot stood at the elevator when she came out with her bag. Charles was there too, quiet and discreet as always, holding her coat. She hugged Charles briefly, and he looked surprised and then pleased. She turned to Elliot. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something high, not afraid exactly, but deeply aware of the drop. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me in. I know that was not easy." He took her free hand and held it for a moment. "I'll call you," he said. She nodded. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and she watched his face disappear behind the polished metal, and she told herself firmly and practically to breathe. Normally all the way down to the lobby. She cried in the taxi to the airport. Not loud weeping, but the quiet, steady kind that comes from feeling too much in too short a time. She cried, and then she stopped and looked out the window at New York, going past, and felt grateful, deeply and completely grateful for the 9 nights, for the coffee and the storm and the Steinbeck novel and the man who had told her the truth about his brother at a rain-covered window. She flew home, and Dorothy met her at the door with hot tea and the particular look of a mother who knows more than she has been told. Jessica sat at the kitchen table and drank the tea and said only that it had been a meaningful experience. Dorothy nodded and did not push, and they watched television together that evening, and everything felt familiar and safe, and also somehow smaller than it had before. Elliot called 3 days later. Then again 2 days after that. They talked for long stretches in the evenings. Him from the penthouse and her from the kitchen table in Ohio. And the conversations had the same quality as the ones in the apartment, honest and unhurried, and full of the small specific details that people share when they are genuinely interested in each other's actual lives. He asked about Dorothy. She asked about the business. He told her about Tommy sometimes. Small stories, the kind of memories that are too personal to share with most people. She listened the way she always listened, with her full attention and without trying to fix anything. 3 weeks after she came home, she started feeling unwell in the mornings. She ignored it for several days, the way busy people ignore things that inconvenience them. Then one evening she was standing in the diner kitchen waiting for an order, and the smell of the cooking oil hit her in a way that sent her directly to the bathroom. And she sat on the cold tile floor afterward and counted days in her head. Very carefully, she bought a test at the pharmacy on her way home that night. She took it alone in the bathroom with the door locked, even though Dorothy was asleep. She sat on the edge of the tub and waited, and when the result appeared, she sat very still for a long time looking at it. Then she put her hand flat against her stomach, the same way she had watched Dorothy press a hand to her own heart when something moved her deeply. And she breathed in and breathed out and said quietly to the empty bathroom, "All right then." She did not call Elliot that night. She did not call him the next night either. She sat with the knowledge alone for 4 days, turning it over carefully like something fragile, examining it from every angle. She thought about Patricia Sloane's words in the kitchen about worlds that do not touch. She thought about Elliot Hawthorne and his business card and the 6-figure number written in black ink. She thought about what it would look like to call a billionaire and tell him she was carrying his child, and how easily that story could be misread and misused by a world that loved to misread and misuse women like her. She thought about Dorothy, who had raised her alone without bitterness, who had made every small thing feel sufficient, who had taught her that a person's worth was not measured by what they could extract from the world, but by what they could give it honestly. On the 5th day she called Elliot. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did, with his name. Direct and clear, Hawthorne. "It's Jessica," she said. "I need to tell you something," she told him plainly and without drama. She did not apologize, and she did not soften it beyond the truth. She told him she was pregnant. She told him she was not calling to make demands or to complicate his life or to become a problem he needed to manage. She told him she was calling because he deserved to know and because honesty was the only language she knew how to speak. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that she checked her phone screen to make sure the call had not dropped. Then he said, "I'm coming to Cincinnati." She told him that was not necessary. He told her it absolutely was, and that he would be there by tomorrow evening, and he did not phrase it as a question. She recognized the tone from the boardroom stories Charles had quietly told her during the 9 nights. The tone of Elliot Hawthorne when his mind was made up entirely. He arrived the next evening in a car that was almost comically out of place on Maple Lane. Dorothy was sitting in her chair by the window, and she watched it pull up with an expression of quiet amusement. Jessica opened the door before he knocked. He looked different outside the penthouse. Still tall, still broad, still with that quality of contained intensity that had characterized him from the first night. But here, on a small Ohio street in the November cold, he also looked human in a way the gleaming Manhattan apartment had sometimes made difficult to see. He was wearing a dark coat, and his hair was still slightly too long, and he had a look on his face that she had not seen there before. He looked afraid, not of her, not of the news. Afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being insufficient, of failing at something that mattered. She recognized the look because she had worn it herself many times. She stepped back and let him in. Dorothy looked up from her chair and regarded Elliot Hawthorne, one of the wealthiest men in America, standing in her small living room with his hands in his coat pockets. And she said, "You look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in years. Sit down." He sat down. Jessica went to make tea. From the kitchen she heard her mother begin to talk to him in that direct, unhurried way she had, and she heard Elliot respond, quietly at first, and then with more ease. And by the time she came back with 3 cups, Dorothy was telling him about the romance novel she was currently reading, and he was listening with genuine attention. Later, after Dorothy had gone to bed, Jessica and Elliot sat at the kitchen table with their tea going cold between them. The house was quiet, and the street outside was quiet. And the moment had the particular quality of something important being decided. In the simplest possible setting, he told her he had done a great deal of thinking on the drive from the airport. He told her that he had spent 2 years believing that the responsible thing was to feel nothing, to want nothing, to be a machine of productivity and distance that could not be heard again. He told her that 9 nights with a woman who asked nothing from him and gave everything real that she had shown him what a devastating waste that philosophy was. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers on the cold ceramic cup. "I am not asking you to come back to New York because of the baby," he said. "I want to say that clearly. I am asking you because I have thought about you every single day since you left, and because I have not made a cup of coffee that tasted right since you stopped making them, and because when you laughed in my apartment, it was the first time in 2 years that a room I was standing in felt like it actually had air in it." Jessica looked at him across the kitchen table. The man who had stood at the window on the first night like a locked room. The man who had picked up Tommy's book and washed her plate and stood in a storm and told her the truth. The man sitting now in Dorothy's kitchen, looking at her like she was something he had almost let himself lose and could not believe he had found again. She thought about Patricia. Sloan in worlds that do not touch. She thought about Gerald Hawthorne's business card and the clinical transaction he had proposed in Rosy's diner. She thought about the girl who had packed a carry-on bag and flown to New York with terror and something she could not name in her chest. She thought that sometimes the things that begin as arrangements become the realest things in a person's life. "I need you to be sure," she said. "Not because of money or because of what people will say or because of the baby. Sure, because you choose this, because you choose me. Plain and honest, exactly as I am." He looked at her steadily. "Jessica Carter," he said, in the plainest voice she had ever heard from him. "I am completely sure." She felt something release in her chest. Something she had been quietly holding since the elevator doors closed on the 9th morning. Some careful guard she had posted there to protect herself from hoping too much. She turned her hand over under his and held it. They told Dorothy together the following morning. Dorothy listened to all of it without interrupting, which took considerable discipline for a woman of her opinions. And when they finished, she looked at Elliot for a long moment with those sharp and completely accurate eyes. And then she looked at her daughter, and then she looked back at Elliot. "You broke his heating," she told him flatly. Jessica pressed her lips together. Elliot looked briefly confused. "Excuse me? The heating in this house," Dorothy said, "has broken every winter for 6 years. You are a billionaire. It is November. Fix the heating." Elliot looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I will have someone here by Thursday." Dorothy nodded with great satisfaction and picked up her romance novel and said, "Good. Now someone make me breakfast." Jessica laughed. The same real, unguarded laugh she had laughed in the penthouse on the 7th night. And Elliot watched her laugh from across her mother's kitchen and wore an expression that people who knew him professionally would not have recognized at all. Open and warm and quietly amazed. The expression of a man who has walked back into the world after a long time away and found that it is still, against all his careful cynicism, capable of being beautiful. 6 months later, on a warm May morning with the windows open and Dorothy in the next room reading her novel, Jessica Carter gave birth to a boy with dark hair and her own hazel eyes. They named him Thomas. Not Tommy, because Tommy was irreplaceable and belonged to the past in the way that loved people do, but Thomas, which carried the same sound forward into a future that was new and unwritten and full of the particular, impossible, ordinary grace of a life being lived honestly. Elliot held his son for the first time with the careful, slightly uncertain hands of a man who was learning something entirely new. And he looked down at Thomas and then looked up at Jessica with an expression that had no armor in it anywhere at all. She reached up and put her hand against his face. He leaned into it like a man who has finally, after a very long time, come home.